All right, we're back in the garage with another project, and that's going to be putting 12 volt power in the back of the Tacoma. Now what that's going to allow me to do is run the fridge that I just got, as well as some LEDs that I'm hoping to install, and any future accessories that run off of 12 volt that I wish to put in the back of the truck. Now I've got this box of goodies right here, and that should have everything that I need to get this project completed. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started.
All right, so we have some 8-gauge wire here. This is going to serve as our main power from the battery to the bed of the truck. I do have some 10-gauge, but I'm not sure I'll use it on this project. We have this 40-amp breaker, which will go in line on the positive side by the battery, just to kind of protect the circuit as well as the battery from being overdrawn on this gauge wire. And we've got some wire lugs here for the 8-gauge, which will connect to the battery, as well as the circuit breaker here, and the fuse block. And I got a little 6 fuse block here, which will serve as kind of the main connection for a lot of our accessories, one of which will be this panel here that's got a little 12 volt display on it. It's got the socket here for the fridge, 12 volt socket. We also have some USB plugs under here, and then a switch that will turn on and control this whole panel. So I'll be able to kill power to this when I don't need it. Then we have some nice heat shrink here with the glue inside, some grommets, connector kit, and then some protective wire wrap for the run that goes under the truck and anywhere else we might need it. So this should basically cover what we need. I did order another set of switches for my LEDs so I can have those kind of controlled in zones, but this is basically should be the basics of what we need to get power to the back of the truck.
So one thing I have to solve for is where I want to mount the 12 volt power, that fuse block, and where my fridge is going to plug in. And I'm thinking I'm going to do it right here in the back corner of the truck. So I got this pretty thin aluminum sheet here, and I think I'm going to be able to make probably a mount that will basically sit somewhere like this under here. And I'll bend this up to fit what I'm thinking. But yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking on that. I'm gonna go ahead and use some cardboard to kind of mock up my idea here, and the bends and stuff, and where thing needs to go, so I can kind of get a feel for placement and all of that stuff. So that's kind of the next step. Alright, so I have a rough initial mock here. This is roughly probably what I'll bend the aluminum into, and then our little fuse block here will probably go right about there underneath it. And then plenty of room in the back there for wires and such, and then I can position it kind of anywhere up and down vertically, since the mounting surfaces are the same.
Alright, so the next thing we did here was took this cardboard template that I bent up, and I folded it flat, and then just kind of marked where all of my bends were in it. And then, as you can see, I transferred that over to the metal and drew those lines across there. And now we'll bend this piece of thin aluminum into the shape we had there in cardboard. Alright, so here it is. Got it all bent up in roughly the shape that it should be. This is really thin gauge metal, as you can see, but the bend will add some rigidity to it, and then once it's mounted, it'll be actually pretty sturdy. I've got some duct tape on it here to test fit it, so we'll go do that. For bending, you also have to ignore the wind chime in the distance. I got the garage door open, but for bending, I just used some wood and sandwiched that piece in between those pieces and bent it up. Yeah, so pretty simple. You can get away with some stuff like that with how thin this metal is.
All right, so I got it kind of mounted where it's going to end up going. I moved the canopy clamp back so I could snug this up more and actually get it underneath this lip a little bit. So that fitment's a lot better. The last thing we got to do is cut the holes for the 12 volt power, so the plug and the switch and the little voltage meter, and then mount the fuse block, and then we'll be ready to run 12 volt power back here.
All right, so for the next portion, we're taping out the square we're going to cut out, and we're going to drill some holes in the corners here, and then take the jigsaw and cut out this portion. And that will provide us our hole for the mount here for our 12 volt power sources. All right, you'll have to excuse how dirty the workbench is, but I'm pumped with how this turned out. So it's all mounted up there. You can see we got the hole cut on the back here. Nothing pretty on the back side necessarily, but it doesn't really have to be. So yeah, I mean, that looks pretty good. We're gonna test fit it up in the truck right now and see how it looks.
So we got it all mocked up and it looks pretty killer. I'm pretty pumped on that. Fitment looks pretty great. I still need to like mount it actually into the truck, but that's gonna be awesome, and doesn't stick out too far, so looks pretty good.
So now it's time to mount this onto our little panel here. I'm thinking this is where it's gonna go. I could probably get away with putting it right over here, but I'm not sure if I want to go that route. I gotta go check clearance on it in the truck, see if it'll clear the clamp, but right here is pretty good. I do kind of like this spot here, and so once we get this all mounted up, then we can go ahead and go through the process of starting to wire some of these things on the back here. So we got that all mounted up now. And the cool thing is there is room back here on the back side. So if I want to flip it over and put the fuse block on the back side of this, I can go ahead and do that, if I want to get it out of the way. But I figure while we're wiring things up and really testing this and making sure it works good, we'll have it on the front so we can easily diagnose any issues. And get other things wired up too, and make sure it's all working how it should, and then at a later time we can hide it on the back if we feel like it.
So now we're gonna wire up this section back here, wire these all to this switch. I bought some 12 gauge wire for that. That should be enough, especially for these short little runs to supply voltage between one another, and then we're gonna run the 12 gauge from the switch to our 30 amp here on the fuse block. So that should all be plenty enough. The main thing that's going to be running off of this is the fridge. So yeah, we got some connectors in here as well to help finish up that job. So okay, so for a little update here, these connections are too close to the bed of the truck, so I couldn't use just kind of some of these standard connectors here. They took up too much space, so we're gonna have to go direct solder on these ones, and I think I'll be able to get away with these connectors on these ones. So got the soldering iron all fired up, and that's what we're starting right now, and we'll heat shrink over these and all that. Okay, so the wiring on the back side here is finished. We went with a direct solder on this because we're super limited on space. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'll cover these terminals up with some hot glue just to keep them kind of serviceable. The switch we're able to get away with some connections on, but everything else is direct soldered and already tested and verified that it works. You would ideally use, little connectors like this, but there just wasn't enough clearance for us to get away with that, so that's why we went with soldering. We got it wired in. I'm not sure if I'm going to keep this wiring like this. This is what wires up this panel here. I may cut a slot in the side here, not sure yet, but I at least wanted to get this up here and validate that it's going to work, especially once we get 12 volt power from the battery to it, just so we can see everything, make sure all the connections are good,
But yeah, just runs through like so. So looks pretty good. I did test and make sure all this worked up here with a 12 volt, so we should be good. Now we're just going to fit it into the truck and drill some holes in this and get it mounted.
All right, it's done. I must say I'm pretty stoked with how it came out. Fits in there pretty dang good. All that's left to do now is to run the 12 volt from the battery to the fuse block here, and then 12 volt power to the back of the bed will be done.
So one thing to do before potentially starting this project is also find yourself some nicer battery terminals. So you can see these are the stock ones here. Not much option for attaching other extra cables, but this one here has got a nice bolt going through here where we can attach other leads for extra accessories. It's just an overall much nicer clamp. So I'm gonna go ahead and change that out right now, which is gonna involve cutting off the circle here, so we just have a lead basically that we can then bolt over here to the side. So yesterday we got the terminals on and sorted for both the positive and the negative side of the battery, so that's all sorted out. Now all we got to do is figure out where we're going to mount the 40 amp breaker, and I'm thinking of making a little bracket that kind of spaces off of this box right here, and then the 40 amp breaker will kind of mount on top. So that's kind of what I think I'm going to fab up for the moment, and we'll see if it works. Change of plans. So we made a different little mount out of that thin gauge aluminum I used for the back piece. Reinforced it here with another layer of the aluminum with some 3M double-sided tape, which is going to be plenty sticky enough to hold that, but that's just some reinforcement. All we got to do is hold up this little tiny thing anyways, and this probably weighs like, I don't know, like a few ounces. It's super light. So this is probably a temporary solution, and it'll end up going probably right around here on the truck. So it'll mount like that most likely and just hold it level. We're going to be running the 8 gauge cable now to our fuse block here, and how we do that is there's a little hole up under there that the wire will drop down into, and so that goes outside of the bed and will run along the frame into the engine bay, but this will end up tucking up underneath the lip right here like so, and it'll run all the way back there to our fuse block, and that's how we'll get power. So you can see how we got that mounted in there. Looks pretty good. It's plenty sturdy. I mean, there's not much play in there at all, so should be fine. This is just a temporary solution. I'm eventually going to get like a Switch Pros or something to go in here, and probably some other mount or fab up, design something myself, something a little more permanent, but for now this will get the job done. Alright, so we're under the truck now. You can see that that's running down through that hole. So what we're going to do is secure it somewhere nice along the frame here and run it up to the engine bay. And I've got the protective cable sleeve, lots of zip ties, and all of the excess. Alright, we're doing this quick because I gotta go, but I left some relief here, so there's plenty of slack here to move up and down, just so there's no strain on anything. And then we routed it up over the frame, and then followed loosely this one over here. Came up here, and then we ran it all the way down. And then up into the engine bay, up over there, and that's where I got to stop for now, but it's good to get that done. So we have the bundle now is up here in the hood, and we just picked a spot, hard to tell, but we picked a spot that's away from the exhaust and anything like that, so it runs up next to some other wires. But we have a big amount of excess here, so I'll have to trim it. I'm going to leave some extra so I have room for future rearranging up here, because this is not a permanent solution. I'll eventually get some sort of tray here with room for more, I guess, accessories like Switch Pros and things like that.
But for now, we'll go ahead and get the positive hooked up to this, and then the negative will run straight to the battery, so we'll have a nice solid connection in the back there. Alright, so it's the next day. It got a little bit dark on us last night, but we were able to get things finished up. Got that hole drilled in the panel, not sure if I showed you guys that already, to run those wires, and then the wires ran there, left us some extra slack so we can tuck it up and then have room in the future to move things around. But yeah, everything works. You can flip the switch here and it reads the battery voltage there. This is wired into our fuse block here on this 30 amp fuse, so this is protected at 30 amps, which should be plenty. The whole system here in the back, all of this power is protected up front by the 40 amp breaker, and I'll show you guys that. So up here at the front is where we ran the wires from the back of the truck up to this 40 amp breaker, and it's right here next to the battery. So this lead runs directly to the positive terminal of the battery, and the negative splits off right here and runs directly to the negative of the battery. And this will give us a nice, good, sturdy, reliable ground for the back. And this allows us to protect everything back there. It also allows us to shut off all power back there, so you don't have to worry about any potential drain or like forgetting to turn a switch off or anything like that. If you want to, you can just turn this off, and that will prevent all power from going to the back. So you can see here we ran the cables from the back of the truck up into the engine bay along the brake lines, and this will keep things away from the exhaust manifold here, so they should be plenty good right there. This was really kind of the cleanest spot to run things up. Another thing I did was left myself lots of excess cable in case I want to make future changes to the position of things, so we have a decent amount of excess, especially on the ground as well. And then this cable can always be remade in the future super easily, so I wasn't really concerned about that, but plenty of excess to change things up if we want. So that's it. The install is done. It didn't cost me a whole lot to do, which I'm super pumped about. I think it was right around $100. I'll link all of the parts that you will actually need to do this in the description below. There are a couple things that I didn't end up using, such as the bus bar and the 10 gauge wire, but I'll have that on hand for future reference. I'm pumped with how this turned out. It looks awesome. It functions great. It's not really in the way. The fridge is going to go next to that anyways. I've already had a chance to use it once, and it worked perfect. It powered the fridge just fine, and I also have these handy dandy lights that I wired in here. That itself will be a future video, so make sure you stick around. I'll show you how I made these lights and how you can make the same ones on the cheap as well. But I think the only thing left to do to it is I'm going to pull the aluminum panel off, and then I'm going to bed line it to match the truck. But other than that, it's done. I'll just add to it as I need to, maybe make some minor adjustments to it, but I'm really stoked with how it turned out, and really couldn't have went better. But if you guys enjoyed this video, let me know in the comments. Leave a thumbs up or a thumbs down, and subscribe if you haven't, to catch some of the upcoming videos. Like I talked about, these LED lights, definitely more adventures as well. But until then, I'll catch you guys in the next video.